So I think we've all heard the saying, hills pay the bills, and it's a part of most coaches' training, and it's been around a long time, arguably one of the most versatile pieces of training you can add to your quiver. And what this graphic is designed to do is just show how versatile hills can actually be, and I'm going to walk you through it here. So this graphic is how I like to think about an athlete's training profile. It's more like a palette of colors than it is anything else. And colors overlap and they blend and they mix, right? But basically you have buckets of color. And in the green, you've got your aerobic system, in the orange, the anaerobic system, and in the blue, your max velocity and your speed training, right? So hills, they can intersect all of these aspects of your training. Despite each bucket being very complex, standing alone on its own. So let's dive into it, just how they can be used and how versatile hills can actually be. So starting in the aerobic bucket over here, aerobic runs include long runs, threshold work, your easy and recovery runs, things like that, right? Hills can be introduced into your aerobic stuff via long hill reps, via short hill reps. As long as the pace is where it's supposed to be, you're going to be getting a nice aerobic stimulus from it. So a good example would be, maybe 8 by 300 on jog down rest at 5K or 10K pace. Giving yourself enough time to buffer the lactic acid out during the jog back down. But your muscles are being taxed a lot harder on the climb up, right? You're being forced to use muscles that you maybe wouldn't normally use. And your heart's having to beat really hard to cover the demands for oxygen as you climb. In the anaerobic session for hills, maybe we're talking about more like mile pace reps on short rest, or big, anaerobic power reps, 200 to 400 meters, 800-meter pace, things like that, right? Well, hills come into play in this energy system as well. You could just as easily do, 2 by 6 by 200 at mile pace on walk down rest or on jog down rest, depending on how advanced of an athlete you are. Or maybe you're doing some kind of Sebco ladder. Maybe it's 200 working up to 300 meters, and it goes in 20-meter increments. So 200, 220, 240, 260, 280, 300, starting at mile pace and slowly working down to 800-meter pace on walk down rest. That'd be a great anaerobic endurance hill session. So moving on to the max velocity bucket down here in the blue, arguably the most complex bucket there is, just because so many different factors go into how fast you're able to sprint, how fast an athlete can move, right? So from basic strength to power to neuromuscular coordination to the way you strike the ground and mechanics, mobility, stability, how much tension sits throughout the system. All these things come into play when it comes to sprinting, and they're all equally important, right? So when we're introducing max velocity work and we want to, introduce the use of hills, we can be doing, short reps on big rests first off. So maybe 20 to 60 meter climbs, at a very, very high intensity on, 4 to 6 minute stand. Would be a great introductory structure into max velocity, power developing, strength developing hill work, right? The other side of max velocity training, which is a little bit higher risk and, needs to be introduced really, really slowly, is just over speed reps. So maybe we're using a hill with a very, very gradual decline, and we're running downhill, and we're just practicing staying up in a good position and compensating, the new speed through healthy mechanisms, right? So maybe that's stride rate, maybe that's, good posture, depending on who you are. So that would be 2 good max velocity hill reps you could add to your repertoire there. So that's kind of how the relationship works between thinking about training in these buckets, and that's how hills pay the bills.